Today we talked to Beth and Lasana, two PhD candidates at the University of Washington School of Information. Lasana is studying digital literacy levels and perceptions among incarcerated people, and Beth is studying the role of libraries in natural disasters.
We discussed their upbringing, journeys to Seattle, culture, history, education, and music.
Find previous episodes of No Blueprint, playlists, and more at noblueprintpodcast.com.
Be sure to follow, like, share, rate, and subscribe on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Peace.
I could stay somewhere else and things could be easier for me, but I would rather know that I was like at home making this difference and that I couldn't change lots of things. And like there were lots of things that were completely out of my power, but like rebuilding the library at my school was one thing that was like completely up to me.
What's up, everybody? I go by the name of Domo.
And I go by the name of Yoshiko.
And each week, we sit down with cultural ambassadors
to talk about how they defied societal norms
to live their lives
with no blueprint.
That's such a complicated question. I think that culture is, the beliefs, the values, the behavioral norms, language, food, all of those kinds of practices and behaviors that makes a group connected. And so I think that there's culture and then there's cultural identity, right? And the cultural identity is how we think we fit into those different cultural groups.
Cool. Yeah, I don't know how I'm going to follow up that one. I think at a very basic level, the way I think about it, culture is essentially everything under the sun, right? So the people, the buildings, right? Food, the music, the clothing, the institutions, all of these make up the culture, right? Our experiences with each of these things, whether it's the food or that we taste or the people that we interact with, all help form and shape culture. So it's essentially everything that's under the sun, essentially. Right? I remember one of the memories that's quite vivid in my mind was around my name, right? So my name's Lasana Magasa, and I remember I went to school in downtown Manhattan, and I remember no one had a name like me, right? And so felt like my name didn't belong, right? So I felt based on the culture that I was surrounded with, that my name should have been like a Michael or Alex or an Adam. And so I used to want it to be that, right? But my culture was also influenced by my neighborhood and my family, right? So I grew up in Harlem. We went to school in Lower Manhattan, and I lived in Harlem. So I would catch the D train or the B train or the A train up to Harlem every day. And, you'd walk through different cultures and different experiences. And, when I went to a store near my school versus I went to a bodega in my neighborhood, the interaction was really different, right? So it taught me kind of how to adapt and how to interact in those different cultural spaces, right? So some things or behaviors that would be automatically understood or identified with in my neighborhood wouldn't necessarily be the case if I was down near my school. But also my family influenced my culture. My parents are Muslim, so there's a heavy Islamic influence, cultural influence growing up at home.
Man, I got a bunch of questions. But what about you?
So my childhood was way different than that, although I did spend some time in upstate New York. I grew up in North Alabama, and both of my parents were from North Alabama, and both of my sets of my parents' grew up there too. Wow. I think probably my first cultural influence is certainly my family. My family is very close, and we still are really close today. I probably talk to my mom and my sister almost every day on the phone. Growing up being biracial, too, was probably one of my really early understanding of culture because I had two completely different sets of families. I had a white family and I had a black family. And really early on, I could see some of the differences in visiting both of those families. And probably one of the things that I remember is that I didn't look like my mom and I didn't look like my dad. We looked different than our parents, where most people, I think, can look up to ideals of beauty or those kinds of standards. They define those in their family. But when you don't look like the other people, I think that there's a little bit of stretch for like understanding where you fit in. And so a lot of times, strangers would come up to us and ask my mom where she got us from, assuming that my sister and I were adopted, because when people looked at our family, they didn't believe that we all went together. And my sister and I have really different memories of that story. My memory says that my mom was like, oh, I made them, and she put her arms around us. And my sister's memory is that my mom said she found us in the Cabbage Patch, and my mom blacked it out completely. So nobody really remembers. But I can remember that happening a few times and people kind of questioning why we were all together. So also I grew up in Alabama.
Right.
And I think that was probably my next cultural influence, is going to elementary and middle school in like a small southern city. And so the kinds of foods that we ate and watching football on Friday nights and Saturdays was really, really important. I think all of those things influenced me from a very young age. Probably one of the things that was different than in my experience was that my grandfather sued the Board of Education in my town so that my father became the first black student in Alabama to desegregate schools.
Wow.
And what that meant for me is that I grew up really early on with a strong sense of activism and a really heavy push towards education and sort of the options and privileges that education can allow you. And I think that those are probably two of the cultural values that got instilled in me in an early age that I've continued, that has continued to shape the decisions that I make and the projects I choose to work on.
Wow.
And then I'll wrap up high school too, because then we'll be in the same spot.
Yeah.
I went to a small Catholic boarding school for high school, and it was about 40 miles south of where I grew up. And we'd go down there on Sunday afternoons, and we'd stay until Friday afternoons, and usually we'd come back home and spend the weekends at home. But my high school was super small. There were 23 other people in my graduating class. And probably, it's tiny. And we had the smallest class. I think the other classes had more like 30, 35, but still very, very small. And, and I moved away from home. And I think that that's certainly one of the experiences that set me apart when I went off to college, because college wasn't my first experience living away from home. I had already done that for 4 years. So sort of that first, kind of initial, I don't have anybody watching me. The experience happened for me when I was 14 rather than 18. And I think that has made a big difference in how I treat my education too.
Right. Wow. You said your grandfather
Yes.
went down and sued the Board
Board of Education.
Board of Education. What year was this?
So this was in 1953.
So before Brown.
Yeah. No. Wait. Hold on. 1963. So Brown was 57.
Yep.
Yeah, so it would have been 1963. So I think that they won the lawsuit in August of 63, and then September, I think it was the 3rd, my grandfather and my father tried to go to First Avenue School in Huntsville, but Governor Wallace sent state troopers to keep him. They shut the school down, and so they weren't allowed to register that day. So my grandfather sent a telegraph, which we just found last time I was home visiting. No, definitely not. I was like, no, what was that thing before that?
Right.
He sent a telegraph, and we actually found the telegraph that he sent to, I think, the Attorney General.
Yeah.
But he sent a telegraph that was like, we tried to register, the school was shut down, and the state troopers were outside.
Yeah.
And so then the president sent down the National Guard. And so about a week after that, he was actually able to start school. And I think that day was September 12th.
Wow.
I think.
I also don't want to glance over that like observation of your mom and you and your sister and your understanding that like y'all didn't feel like y'all looked like either of your parents. What was that like being in the South?
Yeah, I think, I knew that I looked different than them. My dad had 5 younger sisters, so I had a lot of aunts, and I looked sort of like one of them, but really, I really didn't look like anybody else. And I think as my sister was always, would probably be easier for her to answer because she was kind of prissy when she was young. I played a lot of sports, and I really there was no way I was going to the salon and getting my hair straightened on a Saturday. It still won't happen today, but I definitely wasn't doing it when I was a little kid, so I just had a little afro for a really long time. And I always just kind of thought I looked weird, I didn't look like any of the other kids in my class, and my eyes were green and my hair would turn kind of a weird red color in the summer, and I always thought I looked weird. And then I saw Purple Rain, and I know it's kind of a funny thing, but I saw Apollonia and I was like, oh my gosh, she's so beautiful. And I realized that I kind of looked like her, that my features, even though I hadn't seen anybody else on TV, I definitely had never seen, I read all the time, but I don't remember reading any books that had biracial characters. I had Virginia Hamilton books and things like that, but I never remember seeing anybody that had a blended family or that looked like me. And so probably Purple Rain was first, and then Denise on the Huxtable show. Okay. Those were probably the first 2 people. I just remember feeling weird and awkward when I was young, but those were the first 2 people that I visually thought I looked like, and that kind of helped me kind of come into my own of
Nice.
My perception of myself.
What? That's funny. That's great.
Prince does it again.
Yeah. Little known fact: Prince and I have the same birthday.
Hi. That's great. You're wearing purple too.
Oh yeah, that's me. Yes, we're connected. We're connected. I actually wore this for y'all. Go Huskies.
Go Huskies.
Go Huskies.
Husky Purple Friday. Yeah. So I'm wondering, Beth, how did your dad talk about that experience after? And how did that influence?
So my dad wasn't there when that lady came up, but I think probably the specific instances when my dad talked to us a lot about culture was, I can remember him getting pulled over by the police when he was driving, and he had a nice car. He had a Porsche for a little while when we were growing up, and then he had a BMW, and we lived kind of in the country. You were talking about walking to places. I could ride my bike and never make it to anything, no stores or any, it was lots of time in the woods and rock climbing and stuff like that. I can remember when we'd drive around with him, he'd get pulled over all the time. And I can remember asking him, and the cops would always think that it wasn't his car, and he would explain to us why there was this assumption that he was a black man driving too nice of a car, that it didn't belong to him. And he was young. My parents had me at a really young age, so I think that also played into their assumption. But I remember him, a lot of times I hear when people ask me where I'm from and I say Alabama, the next thing they say is, well, you don't really have an accent. And I do sometimes. It gets worse, depending on how many adult beverages I've had. And when I say certain things, but one thing that he always said is that you're a black woman from the South, and people will discredit you because you're from the South, because you're a woman, and because you're black. And so the last thing you need to do is open your mouth and start talking, with a twang. And so he constantly pointed out instances of injustice and ways that we would be perceived differently, and taught us how to act accordingly, to kind of navigate, those things that we have to teach our brown kids.
Right.
Interesting, actually, because for my experience growing up was a little bit different from that perspective, right? And as you were talking, I thought back to my experiences in elementary school. I remember I don't remember myself as being a bad kid or anything, but I remember I used to always get suspended suspended from class or get suspended from lunch, and then I'd have to actually go all the way to Harlem for lunch, and then get back on the train and come back to school. And I never, to this day, I still actually don't understand why, but I mean, I actually do now, I guess, right? So they're kind of telling me I don't belong, right? But my parents never, ever articulated that. What they always told me is that you need to go to school, right? For them, it was a priority that I go to school and that I get an education, and then I pass my classes and I stay out of trouble. For some reason, I don't know. Like I said, I don't remember being like a bad kid, but for some reason, I was always in trouble. And so that also they would confuse me and my brother.
So you guys are identical?
We're identical. Oh. And so then they wouldn't know who did what. And
so maybe it was your brother.
Maybe. I don't know.
All the
but
time.
Even him, he's actually more quiet than me. He's just like, he's like a mouse. I mean, he's just raving now. He goes to work and goes home, and I call him and we talk, and he says a few words, and that's it. So I can't imagine he was doing anything.
There is the backdrop of the Harlem Renaissance, the Malcolm X's, there's so much culture, black culture and black history that came out of Harlem. And Beth, growing up in the South, in the heart of what was the Civil Rights Movement and all of what is the culture of black culture in the South, I guess, how did that influence y'all? And then what about where you were at influenced your upbringing?
Well, interestingly, I don't think, definitely in elementary school, I don't ever remember learning about anything about like Harlem Renaissance. I mean, I think I might have heard Malcolm X and Martin Luther King once or twice, but I really didn't learn about the culture of Harlem until I went away to college. In high school, I think there might have been more exposure, but there's nothing notable or memorable that sticks out to me. Most of what I learned about Harlem culture and the culture of my community came from the community, right? So it was things like the importance of honor and respect and sticking together, right? And basketball and music, right? So those were the cultural values. Even now, I mean, if you go to Harlem, it's changed a lot. The culture is not what it once was, and honestly, I can't confidently say that the young people in the community know about how rich a past, even a recent past, there was. I mean, the only thing, I think is that famous restaurant.
Red Rooster?
No.
It's a woman's name,
yeah, woman,
right?
Yeah, a woman's name.
Sylvia?
Sylvia, yeah. So Sylvia, like everyone knows.
Yes.
Everyone knows Sylvia, right?
Yeah.
In that respect.
We're like on the flight path. There's booming systems.
Windstorm has come.
Windstorms. There's ghosts in here. All right.
For some reason, when you asked that question, the first thing I thought about was switches. Like getting in trouble and having to go pick a switch.
Oh my God.
Like pick your own poison. Yeah. And I don't remember being in trouble a lot either, like clearly sometimes, but I don't know why. I mean, I'm feeling like if you grew up in a city, you probably didn't have to pick your own switches when you got in trouble.
The statutes of limitation.
Yeah, that's. I can recall my great grandma making me go do some of that. That I think is a direct product of growing up. I think kind of growing up like kind of near farms, we sat outside and shelled a lot of peas and talked about, that's where I think a lot of our stories kind of got passed along. And my family was very involved in history, in our local town. And my grandfather had a camera and a video camera, so he had taken a lot of footage of the civil rights movement. And so I think that, we were very aware from a young age of what happened in our community, and we were always involved in like big brother, big sister, like volunteering to tutor other kids, and we were always going out and doing, kind of uplifting things in the community as well. And I think that I moved to New Orleans when I was 18 to go to college, and I think that kind of, I've always been like a history fan, so like going to places, that are older than what I can imagine are always fascinating to me. Like, I was the kind of kid that would like watch the Civil War Time Life series like over and over again because I just loved like those things mixed together.
Yeah.
And so when I moved to New Orleans was like the perfect blend of like historical culture.
Nice.
And it allowed me to learn, and change, the person that I was. It certainly added several spheres onto, the cultural understandings that I had from when I was a kid.
Nice.
And, people ask me, I always say I grew up in New Orleans. I spent my childhood in Alabama, but I grew up in New Orleans. It made me
Nice.
like the adult that I am.
What school in New Orleans?
I went to Loyola University in New Orleans for
Shout-
undergrad.
Shout out to
Wolfpack.
Loyola. Okay.
Wolfpack.
All right.
And then I got my first master's degree from LSU
Hey.
in Baton Rouge. Go Tigers.
Listen, all right. Listen, I was gonna dive deeper, but where did you go to college, Lasana?
Actually, I went to a historical black college and university called St. Paul's College in Lawrenceville, Virginia. Fortunately, it's closed now, which is a phenomenon we've been seeing with a lot of our black
HBCUs.
institutions generally, but more specifically the HBCUs. But it was a great experience. I wouldn't trade it for the world. And the way I actually ended up there is kind of bizarre, but everything happened for a reason. I was supposed to go to another college. I think it was Connecticut, and that summer is when I used to party. I was going to like Dominican clubs up in Washington Heights, and didn't send like some money or something, and so I couldn't go to that school that I was supposed to go to. And so I went to my librarian off of Fordham Road. Fabulous lady. I don't remember her name right now, but I went down there to the library, and I told her like, I got to go to college. Like, my parents are expecting me to go to college, and she was like, "Well, have you ever heard of HBCUs?" I was like, "No." She's like, "Well, you should think about going to St. Paul's College." And so she, like, right there and then got me registered. It was like a rolling admissions. And I got admitted, and I went to my dad. He gave me $1,500. I got my suitcase, and I went down to school, and that was
I was about to say, he made it like that happen in the same day. went to the library. Went to the library. Got back from the club at 4.
Realized, oh shoot.
So, what did y'all do after college?
I got a degree in education, and I started teaching for the New Orleans public school system. And I worked at a creative arts citywide access school, so a magnet school that was in the French Quarter in New Orleans. And it was an amazing place to work. We had like open permission slips, so the parents just signed one permission slip at the beginning of the year, and I could take my class out of the classroom anytime I wanted to, as long as we could like walk. I just had to like leave a note in the office. So we could walk down to the Mississippi River and write our journals, or walk to the cathedral and have everybody draw something that they saw there. And so really we got to have the kind of whole French Quarter be our classroom. And there was lots of band and lots of art classes and those kinds of things. A lot of the big New Orleans, or some of the big New Orleans musicians went to that school as kids. And it was super great. I did that for about 5 years, and then I went back and got my master's degree and became a librarian. The first school I worked at was a French Montessori school, actually. So they had a French immersion program, and then the other half of the school was a Montessori school. So we had kind of 2 library collections to keep up with. And then I became the head librarian at an all-boys Catholic school. And our school was 125 years old when I started working there. And we had about 1,200 boys. And I was there, I think I got hired in July. No, I think I got hired in June. And so I started in July, and then August 29th, Hurricane Katrina hit. And so we were displaced and homeless for a few months until the city reopened for a month, when the city opened at the end of October. And so I spent the next few years after that rebuilding our school library and writing grants and raising money to kind of, replace all the infrastructure that we lost. and had the opportunity to set up several temporary libraries in different size trailers, and finally getting to design a permanent library for our new school building. And, kind of both of those, the experience of growing up being biracial and not having materials of families that looked like mine or kids that looked like mine, that experience and this experience in Katrina are probably two of the pivotal ones for me, and that have shaped my research and what I spend the most time investigating.
Okay. What did you learn about yourself during Hurricane Katrina or after Hurricane Katrina?
First, I learned what things were kind of most important to me. We left in a hurry, and so there were things that I wish I had with me that I worried about, all the time, that were a couple of pieces of jewelry that my grandmothers had given me that I knew I couldn't replace, and then artwork that my friends made me, and then photographs. I think pictures and the memories that I had created with my friends and family, those three things, if I ever had to grab all the stuff that was most important to me, again, if I had 15 minutes, I'd have no problem with that. Before, where I thought I needed all of these things to make my life.
Right.
I learned that I personally could go through way more than I was way stronger than I really thought possible. I always worked, and I'm a workaholic, so I never really thought about not having a house or not having a car or not having stores even to buy groceries so that you could make food. And we'd have to eat from the Salvation Army food trucks, and we'd have to get MREs from FEMA, and we camped out in our house for 6 weeks without power. A tree fell through the back part of our house, and we lost the roof in the front part of our house. But our middle bedroom and the bathroom and the kitchen were kind of okay. So we camped out in that part while the other parts got fixed. And so it was just this idea that I could stay somewhere else and things could be easier for me, but I would rather know that I was at home making this difference, and that I couldn't change lots of things, and there were lots of things that were completely out of my power, but rebuilding the library at my school was one thing that was completely up to me. And I think that I learned that in moments when I am challenged, I am going to rise to that challenge. And when obstacles happen in your life, do they crush you or do you crush them? And I think that I really learned that I'm a crusher of obstacles in that way. And I think probably one of the important things that I've learned, and I just wrote about this today, that the library at my school wasn't about the building or the books in it, and my city wasn't about the infrastructure, that it was really all about the people and the relationships there, and that kind of spirit of community and the resilience of our community is really what is most important, and that it doesn't really matter if we have any of this other stuff.
Right.
What we have as a community, as a culture, will persist and remain.
What did you do after college, Lasana?
After college, I had to figure out what I needed to do in my life. First thing I did was move back to New York, back to Harlem, and I got my undergrad in computer science, and so then I started looking for jobs. And honestly, I feel like because my parents never at least made it a point to let us know that discrimination was real, that I never really ever considered it. So anytime I stepped in a space or I sent my resume somewhere, I always assumed that they were judging me based on an equal criteria, right? Across everybody. I didn't get many responses to my resume. And so I also applied for AmeriCorps, and I did get hired for AmeriCorps. and I was placed at a community justice center in Harlem. It's called Harlem Community Justice Center. It's a reentry clinic, and it also has youth court. And so I worked there for I think 2 years as a mediator, and also doing their web design work, and going into the New York City public schools and and teaching conflict resolution, so alternatives to violence and teen violence, dating violence, gang intervention, and so I did that sort of work for a few years. And one of my mentors from my HBCU, Mr. Newkirk, or Dr. Newkirk now, he was the one who recommended I look at a MLS program or MLIS program. And so Queens College in New York had a Master's in Library and Information Studies program. AmeriCorps actually paid for most of that, if not all of it, because it's a government-funded program, and they give you a stipend and some money for school.
What years did y'all come to Seattle?
Same year.
Same year, 2009.
Doesn't matter.
Wow, so you guys both
We were in the same
cohort. Wow. Okay. Shout out to the high school. That's legit. That is legit. See, coincidence? I think not.
Yeah, so we both came to the iSchool under a fellowship that specifically looks at increasing the number of professors of color that we have in the library and information science field.
What were your first impressions about Seattle?
Where's my uncle pollo? Is that? I said it's a lot. Yeah. So I mean, food was my. In New York, we had a lot of variety of foods. There's a lot of variety of foods here, but the variety. I mean, it's a different variety. And so I was looking for my West Indies food, and my Puerto Rican and Dominican food, and my West African food, and it's not here. There are a few spots but there's spots you gotta plan a full day trip to go and get it. Also, the communities are different. They're just different. Not like most people didn't look like me.
I was surprised. I was always looking for black folks. I was like, there are no black people here. And I never lived a place, like that where that hadn't been, a big part of like what I saw every day. And so I think that was probably the first thing that was like shocking. And then I didn't know that the sun was going to go down so early. Like I knew it was going to rain, like I knew it was going to be like drizzly. I did not know it was going to get dark at like 3:00. And like, I think like the first 2 years I lived here and I didn't mind, of course, the sun being out late, but like it getting dark so early, that really like threw me off.
Yeah. I
had a hard time with that.
I hear you.
Prior to 2009, had either of you been to Seattle Pacific Northwest?
I came out here when they opened CenturyLink. I came out here for a Saints game in like 2004. So I have season tickets. I've had them since 2002 in New Orleans. And so a group of us will travel and see games at different places. So like we've gone to Candlestick Park in San Francisco and closer games, but we all came out to Seattle for a game when CenturyLink opened. And then I actually came here on my honeymoon. We flew to Seattle and spent a day here, and then went up to like Vancouver and Whistler, and then the islands, and then back to Seattle. So I'd been here twice, and then I came out for the interview.
Oh, okay.
So
shout out to my parents who also have season tickets to the Saints.
yeah.
Yeah, I had visited Seattle one time before. It was I think the Special Libraries Association had their annual conference here, and so I came out for a few days. Seattle has good food. So I will say that, again, the selection is different, but they do. I especially like the seafood that's here. It's pretty high quality, and it's affordable, or at least it used to be. There's been a cultural shift in Seattle while I've been here, and it's really interesting because it reminds me a lot of the culture shift that had begun while I was in Harlem. So the displacement of people whose lives and history are embedded in the community, and like early on I said culture is it's the buildings that exist in the community.
Absolutely.
And so pretty much uplifting those buildings and changing the decor of the neighborhoods, so that gives it a different aura and an image, losing what was here before. And it's interesting. There was a New York Times article that I came across probably last month. Someone, a journalist had, while they were walking in Brooklyn, I think Crown Heights, they found a photo album on the ground in the trash, and they picked up the photo album and they took it home. And they opened it up, and it was a bunch of pictures of someone like in the 1950s. And so they went through the pictures. They were trying to identify who the people were. Right? And so they took the photo album back to the community, and they took each picture out, did like this big investigation, and found out it was a family who had lived and grew up in Crown Heights, but they had moved out because of the community. Those people, I guess the politicians that help shape our communities, had created a situation where they could no longer exist in that space. Yeah. And so I see the same thing is happening here
Displacement,
in
for sure.
in Seattle. I mean, if we look at Rainier Avenue, we have condos now going for over $1,000, right?
And condos being built everywhere.
Everywhere.
So, and this is a community where there's typically mostly like low income, middle income families.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Where do y'all find community, I guess, now, being in Seattle?
I'm lucky because one of my good friends' family has kind of adopted me, and they have some Louisiana roots. And so, if it's 4th of July barbecues, and I'm always welcome over there, and her cousins are my cousins, and they, have come to my lectures and watch me lecture and things like that. And so I think that it took me a little while to find, I think when I first got here, we came here for school. So we started, kind of with our own little community at school. Like we took our classes together. But as, after those first 2 years, when you're done with classes, nobody's on campus anymore. And so your focus kind of shifts from taking classes to like doing your own work. And from then on, I think the journey of finishing your PhD is kind of a lonely and isolating one because you work so much. For me, I found that in, my friends and some of their family around here.
That's a great question. Sometimes I feel like I don't have community here, honestly. So, there's a mosque that I go to. There are brothers and sisters who we share some same cultural and religious values. I think there's limits in terms of even the community there. So I don't really feel like I have a community here in Seattle. It might be partly because of I live in the North End, and there's not many people that look like me in the North End, really. I don't know what it is, honestly, but I can't really say I have a community here.
I think part of it for me has been that I've always kind of thought about Seattle as like a temporary place for me. Like I'm here for school, and UW doesn't really hire their own PhD students. So if I want to be a professor when I'm finished with school, it's the chances are that I'm going to have to move after this. So it's kind of like, I think part of, having true community is like, I kind of feel like a transient, like I'm here for now, but I won't be here that long. And certainly when I moved here, that was my idea. I've lived kind of near school, and I lived up in like Edmonds, Linwood, and I just moved down to White Center. And I think I kind of mentioned this to you the other day, that it's the first time that I felt like I have a community and that I'm part of a community and that I go to like local meetings and that I'm starting to be involved in going to programs that are locally based. I mean, I think it's because I have more time. Like I'm not reading I'm still kind of reading constantly, but I guess my time is less structured than it used to be with all the classes and things and deadlines. So now I have more of an opportunity, and now I think it's harder for me to think about leaving Seattle than when I got here. And I think that and a big part of that is because I'm just starting to find community. And I think we've had a lot of work to do, and I don't think that lends itself to like getting out there and mingling either.
I first moved to Seattle in 2011, 2012, and I moved to North Seattle. And it was super uncomfortable.
I was the only person of color on the bus, and was like, quickly was like, I can't do this. Like, this is awkward. And had a friend who grew up on Beacon Hill, and quickly moved to Beacon Hill, and that's where Yoshi and I met at someone's housewarming party. And I was like, "What, you like Pharrell? Me too. You like music? Me too." And so and so definitely began to find that community once I went back to a place that had a strongly rooted community of color in Seattle. So yeah, absolutely.
I grew up in South Seattle my whole life, so
Okay.
I guess I've seen people. I grew up with people around me, are just very diverse. I definitely see it changing now. I catch the bus a lot, and just seeing the demographic change on the bus has been very interesting, because I've been taking it since I was in middle school, and just seeing that progression since then has been very interesting. What places do you go to for like the best food you've had in Seattle, or good food, or something close to something?
So I like Catfish Corner. They have sweet tea, and if I have a bad day, I like need sweet tea. And so Catfish Corner, like, and it used to be
Yeah,
Yep.
right over there, but it
23rd.
moved. So I'm glad that it reopened. I like Island Soul a lot too. That's everything there is always good. I think those are probably my two favorite.
I take
Nice.
that back. Catfish Corner, MLK, and Cherry.
Yeah.
I don't want people to kill me.
That's right. Get
23rd,
Get
what?
Catfish Corner
It's
right.
on-
That's on MLK.
Then it
Oh,
moved
the old-
now. It
the
moved
original
to.
location? Is it on Yesler? I don't know. I saw a little sandwich board.
I think it moved to something in
sounds
Yesler.
right.
Well, look,
I've only been to the new one once.
Okay, I haven't been to the new one yet, but the folks listening, Google Catfish Corner and get it.
Their fried okra is what's up.
Hey.
So there actually used to be a Caribbean spot off of 50th and University. It's closed.
Oh, Pam's
Pam's.
Pam's
Kitchen.
Kitchen. They moved to
East Lake.
Yeah,
Right? Yeah.
yeah. And then there's a West African spot next to the Bank of America when you're going towards on Rainier, not far from Orcas.
Okay.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Well, those are the two spots.
Oh, okay.
What are you listening to currently?
So I listen to so much stuff, but I think I really love Childish Gambino's new album. I
Okay.
think that's pretty fantastic. Purity Ring, which is kind of like I don't know if they're EDM. I don't really I listen to lots of things, but I don't really know how it's classified or if it's
Genres, yeah.
popular or not. Like, I know that I like it, and I don't.
That's all that matters. That's all that
Yeah.
matters.
There's a funk band called Wolfpack that I really like. They're
Okay.
super into on stage shenanigans. Like, the bass player plays the whole time and everybody else switches instruments like mid song. So
That's
instead of
actually-
during the song break, he'll keep playing and they'll run around on
Okay.
stage during the show. And so to me, that's super surprising and innovative.
Yeah.
I just saw Robert Randolph and the Family Band on Sunday, and their new album Got Soul is super amazing.
Okay.
He plays a slide guitar, and everybody in the band is like his cousin. He was introducing them, and I was like, oh, when he said Family Band, he meant it. It's like my cousin on the drum, and my cousin on keys, and my cousin on guitar, and my other cousin on guitar, and my sister is the backup singer. It was amazing. But the Got Soul album is super good,
Get it.
kind of gospel-y, R and blues, solid soul. It's
Nice.
pretty fantastic.
Nice. All right. Well, thank you for your time. This was amazing. This was great. I can see a follow-up podcast with each of you. But yeah, this is great. So thank y'all for listening to No Blueprint.
No blueprint. Yeah.